When we think of an inheritance, we might think about houses, land, or a sum of money that a parent or grandparent left to someone after they passed away. While they didn't actually leave it, they set it aside and they made a legal statement called a will, in which they state that after they pass away, they want this and this relative to get this and this portion. Or they don't want certain relatives to get a portion. That's a will. Now, that's one type of inheritance. But realize inheritance is also biological. If you have a dark skin, that means that you got it from your parents and grandparents and your other ancestors that lived before you. If you have blue eyes or red hair, it's also biological inheritance. Now, apart from that, if you grew up in Britain, you speak British English. You grew up in the United States, you speak American English. You grew up in Australia, you speak Australian English. So also the language is inheritance you get, not just from your ancestors, but from the people in your community. But it goes even further. You can even inherit traits. If you are from a village where people are often at work on farms, then you become quite fit because since a child you do a lot of physical labor. You grow up in a city where people love to eat fast food, then likely you will have obesity. Now it doesn't have to, but it's likely. So your environment passes on things to you. Your environment passes things on to you. You are shaped by your environment. Now, as an adult, or better said, while growing up, and especially as an adult, you have the ability to rectify certain things or to bring changes. But even then, you have already been made by your environment. And even as an adult, your environment has an influence on you. Now, just as you inherit things legally or financially, you can also inherit things biologically, socially, culturally, linguistically. You can also inherit things energetically, or as people say, spiritually. For example, let's say nobody liked your father. People had issues with your father. Most likely they'll have issues with you too. Why? Because you come forth from your father. Or let's say nobody likes your mother. And you're a woman, you look like your mother. Likely they'll have issues with you because you look like your mom. You may even have similar characteristics. Even if you never spoke a word to those people who have issues with your mother, just because you are from your mother means that they feel comfortable passing on their hatred from your mom onto you. Or let's say that your father was a businessman with a good reputation, and now you want to start your own business. Because of the good reputation of your father, people associate you with your father, and therefore they will also associate you with his good reputation, and doors may open for you more easily in the financial world. That's how it goes in this world. Most of the things that relate to you didn't come from you. You inherited them. So understand the following. Many of the dysfunctions and conflicts you have in daily life didn't come from you. You inherited them from your environment and from your ancestors. For example, if you are from African ancestry, sub-Sahara African ancestry, but you were born in the United States and your ancestors used to be slaves in a transatlantic slave trade, then you inherited certain conflicts in your life. Racial discrimination is one of them. Division in the Afro-American community. Prejudice from society against black folks in general. You inherited some stuff. And those conflicts are not things you chose for. You didn't ask for them, you just inherited them. So now in daily life, you have to face those conflicts. Those conflicts did not begin with you, but they've been passed on to you. So now you have to deal with the conflict. Because if you don't deal with the conflict will haunt you. Maybe you are born in the Philippines to Chinese parents, and your parents come from a lineage of Chinese migrants that moved to the Philippines during the colonial era. And during the colonial era, the Chinese migrants held a big portion of the Spanish economy in the Philippines. But now that the Philippines is independent, you have this social stigma against the Chinese Filipinos, and you are a Chinese Filipino. Now, you cannot undo the history of your ancestors, absolutely not. Neither is it your fault if there was conflict between your ancestors and the locals of the Philippines. Nevertheless, you are the descendants of your ancestors, and the people of the Philippines, your fellow Filipino people, also descendants of their ancestors. The ancestral conflict has been passed on. So you have to deal with it in your daily life. Because if you don't deal with it, the conflict will deal with you. So understand the following. Community history, as well as family history, is quite important. It's important for you to know the history of your own family that you come from, but it's also important to know the history of the community you grew up in. And even if you didn't grow up, in an environment, if you moved to a certain place, let's say you grew up in London, and now you move to Los Angeles. If Los Angeles is afflicted with gang violence, then you better know the community history of Los Angeles. There you will figure out how the gang violence emerged and why it's afflicting Los Angeles today. If you move to Los Angeles without knowing that there's a conflict playing out over there, namely gang violence, and you just move in your new apartment or your new villa or whatever, you will face unnecessary danger. Even when you go on a holiday somewhere, you check the guides. You have online guides where people give you advice about certain places. For example, when I was in Guatemala for fieldwork, I was told beforehand that it was the zones 15 and 10 that were good to stay in. Other zones of the capital were bad news. And zone 1, even Guatemalans told me, don't go to zone 1 in the capital. You likely won't survive it. And I was not there for a holiday, I was there for field work for my master's degree in Latin American studies. And even for that short stay of only 2 months, I had to know what I got myself into. Because what if I would walk through zone 1 of Guatemala City not knowing that that's a dangerous area? I would face a lot of unnecessary conflict or a lot of unnecessary danger. So knowing about the community history of a place is important. But realize this, when people go on vacation or on holidays, they pay attention to the community history of the place. But when it comes to their own daily life, they often don't. And that's a contradiction. Why is it that when we go on a holiday, we pay more attention to the community history than when it comes to our own dwelling place? This doesn't add up. Here's why people behave this way. When you go on a holiday or vacation, you're only there for a little while. So you only pay attention to the outworking of the conflict by avoiding the conflict. But if you live somewhere, you're there most of the time, you have no choice but to face the conflict. But most people don't want to face the community conflicts around them. And by not facing the community conflicts, they put themselves in harm's way. The conflict ends up devouring them. Or they may end up as collateral damage because of the conflict. Now, knowing the community conflict does not mean you have to choose a side who you agree with. Because sometimes all sides are wrong. It simply means you know what is going on and you know how to anticipate things. Look, many of you are suffering from community conflicts that are playing out in your daily life. And the people who have issues with you are just dumping the conflict on you because they don't want to deal with it. And that's what goes on in the world. That's what goes on in society. It's similar to throwing a hot potato at a crowd of people. Nobody wants to catch the hot potato because the hot potato will burn your hands. So everyone that catches the hot potato throws it at someone else. And everyone keeps on throwing the hot potato at someone because nobody wants to deal with their hands being burned by the hot potato. Or let's say you have several hot potatoes you throw into the crowd. Everyone is running away. Or everyone tries to divert the hot potatoes from falling on them because nobody wants to deal with it. The same it is in society. Communities have conflicts. Those conflicts are deep-rooted. Some of those conflicts are so deep-rooted people don't even notice it's a conflict. Some of those conflicts go back generations. It's important to be aware of these things. However, just because you're aware of a conflict is not enough. You must discern what the conflict is about. Let me give an example. Let's say you have, I'm going to use Chinese migrants as an example. Let's say you have a Chinese community somewhere, and there's a lot of gambling and alcoholism in the Chinese migrant community. Now, why is there so much gambling and alcoholism over there? Because go back 160 years, yet the first Chinese migrants had arrived and they were exploited by the locals. So what happened? Chinese criminals, the Chinese triad, which is the Chinese mafia, came and assisted the Chinese migrants in that area by sponsoring them financially. In exchange, the Chinese migrants back then helped the Chinese mafia with laundering money. This led to criminal conflicts that led to homicide. And the Chinese migrant community back then was torn apart by those conflicts. But because they were a migrant community, they had no choice but to get along. So the local authorities permitted some Chinese casinos to be opened, and you also had many Chinese restaurants and Chinese bars that were opened, and now the Chinese community developed a habit of drinking a lot and going to the casino. Going to the casino and drinking a lot was a way for the Chinese migrant community to cope with the conflict. Now, several generations later, you still have this Chinese community over there, and the generations that followed inherited the same conflict. Now, it can be that the people from that Chinese community, the Chinese migrant community, that they're not involved in crime, neither are the alcoholic. But still, alcoholism is something that's quite common in the community. And because the host country is used to having the Chinese migrant community afflicted with alcoholism, that's a stereotype people develop concerning them. So people in that host country, when they encounter a Chinese individual, they think about casinos and being drinking. Why? Because that is what they were exposed to while growing up. That's what their parents were exposed to. And it's a fact that that was the thing, or the two things that afflicted that community. Now, if you are from that Chinese migrant community and you're not aware of this historical conflict that's playing out in your community, then you will be upset when people from the host country that you grew up in associate you with casinos all the time. You think they're racist for doing that, but the thing is not racism. There is an actual conflict that people are referring to that you're not aware of. Now, is this an excuse for people to discriminate against you because they think, oh, when you have money, you're going to waste it in casinos? No, absolutely not. It's not an excuse for people to use it for racist jokes or whatever. But even if there are racist jokes about Chinese going to casinos often, those racist jokes are based on some historical fact that people haven't addressed. Now, that is how you deal with the community conflict, by facing what the conflict is, by knowing what the root is, and now you realize that this conflict is a pattern that afflicts your community. Now you know how to outsmart the pattern. So, for example, if you're from a Chinese migrant community and there's a historical conflict that resulted in a pattern of alcoholism and gambling, what you can do is that you are going to avoid Chinese bars. You're a Chinese man, but you avoid Chinese bars. Why? By doing that, you cannot be associated directly with alcoholism. What you can also do is that you avoid bars altogether. Why? On your part, you realize, there is a pattern of alcoholism in my community. I grew up in this community, so somewhere this pattern has shaped me. I need to look in the mirror and see where I've been shaped by this conflict so that I can now outgrow that conflict and move further. I'm not saying that you have to leave the Chinese migrant community altogether, but you must be aware of the pattern that afflicts it. And you must realize that the pattern only continues because people don't face the conflict. Now, that was just an example. All communities in the world have conflict. All communities have community conflict. Society is the platform where all those community conflicts play out. So, realize that community conflicts are things all of us will face. All of us were shaped by community conflict to some extent. So all of us need to look in the mirror, face ourselves, and decide to improve and become better. Because all of us, one way or the other, have been shaped by community conflicts. Nobody is free from it. Nobody. So, when you encounter people that deny community conflict, those are the type of people you need to watch out for. Why? Because those are the type of people that are most likely to set you up and to betray you. Why? They don't even want to be consistent with reality. If someone is not even consistent with reality, what makes you think they'll be consistent with you? They will not. Look, it's not on you to solve every community conflict. Because some of those conflicts cannot be solved. They have to be abandoned. Listen to what I'm saying. Some conflicts need to be abandoned, not solved. For example, if, let's say your grandfather used to be the scapegoat of the community. Everyone treated him badly. But your grandpa survived, he got married, he had children. Now, the community that mistreated your grandfather, they were humiliated and embarrassed by your grandfather surviving their violence. And your grandfather developed psychological issues. So everyone that encounters your grandfather realized this man has been severely abused. And all the people figured out how his hometown treated him. So the people from your grandfather's hometown faced backlash. Now, that was your grandfather. You are two generations further. Okay, you are the grandchild of your grandfather. Look at this. The hometown of your grandfather is now afflicted with crime. Why? Because the community, when your grandfather survived and moved on, their anger against your grandfather backfired and the people turned on each other. And now because those people turned on each other, it unfolded in crime. And the crime kept lingering around. So now you know why your parents never spoke about the hometown where they grew up in. Now you know why. Now, that place where your grandfather grew up, which is afflicted with crime now, the crime that afflicts over there is the result of narcissistic abuse against your grandfather that backfired. And look at this. The people that live there today never knew your grandfather. They don't know you. They only know each other and the interpersonal conflicts they have. But the people are so used to escalating upon one another. Can you now, as an outsider, go and solve the situation? No. The people there need to recognize that there's some type of demonic pattern that afflicts them, and they need to stop participating in that pattern. So many of them will just have to leave that hometown and live somewhere else, or go abroad for a little while. Then, when a lot of people do that, the hometown will depopulate, and by the hometown depopulating, there will not be that many people around to enact the conflict, and then those people that moved away for a while realize, what the heck was that? And now, because they're out of the toxic environment, they all can heal, and that's how the conflict is abundant. That's why you have certain towns or villages that become abundant. They're not abundant because people move to cities, because the cities are more pleasant to live in. It's not just urbanization. Some towns and some villages, and sometimes even neighborhoods in cities, become desolate because people move away. Because the community conflict escalated so much that people realize we can't solve this. This conflict has to die out. There are two ways a conflict can die out. Either all the participants die within a short period of time, and there are no descendants to continue the conflict. Either that happens, and that can be accomplished through genocide or to some national disaster or whatever, or the people there abandon the environment so that they can heal from the toxicity of the environment. So sometimes it's good for you to move out of a place for a while. Unfortunately, most people in the world don't want to face the community conflicts around them. They just want a scapegoat to escalate the whole conflict upon to get ease. So understand the following. Everyone you encounter on the earth, they came out of some community conflict, all of them. Now, if they are delivered from the community conflict, that's good. But if they're not delivered and you engage with those people, you now participate in their community conflicts too. Now let me give you a small parable here. Let's say you have a nephew, okay, and he is in the streets and he stole a few $1,000s from a drug dealer. Okay? Now, the drug dealer as well as the gang of the drug dealer are looking for your nephew. And what if your nephew tells you, Uncle, can I stay with you for a few days till I get my own apartment? And you think, okay. Or after I get my own flat. So you think, okay. Your nephew stays with you in your flat for a few days. After a few days, he's gone. But then you notice that you have all those strangers staring at you. when you leave your house. This is what happens. You had no idea what your nephew was involved in. So the conflict he was involved in, namely those people that wanted to hurt him, that conflict kept following him, and now those people that have issues against him located him at your address. So the last place you saw him was at your address. So now they're keeping your address in check just to see when their enemy is coming. But because their enemy is gone, soon they're going to approach you. And because they're agitated with violence, they will violate you by kidnapping you or torturing you to get information where your nephew is. And likely he will kill you afterwards. So you allowing your nephew to stay in your flat for a few days was a very bad idea. Now, that's just a parable. But the same it is in daily life. Everyone you encounter came out of some type of community conflict. Everyone. So know their backgrounds, where they come from, and know the community history of their backgrounds. Then you know what you're getting yourself involved in. Then you know what you're getting yourself involved with. Because a lot of people simply don't do this. A lot of people simply meet new folks. If interests match and expectations match, that's it. They don't ask themselves, is this individual willing to look at themselves in the mirror and decide to become better? They don't ask that question. And they don't do a background check on the family history nor the community history of the individuals they get involved with. This is something quite dangerous. You should always know who and what you're dealing with. And that is why this whole construct called privacy is quite dangerous. Because what if someone is aware that they're from a background with a lot of toxic conflict, but they don't want other people to know about this? Why? Because they know very well, if other people know that they are from a background with a lot of toxic conflict, others may reconsider being involved with them. So because they don't want to miss out in social contact, they hide as much as possible about their background. And people say, well, it's privacy. You have a right to control what people know about you. Okay, but that means that this individual is deceiving others. This individual is withholding vital information about themselves from others just to get the approval, and the same thing from other people. So all those people that develop a positive view of them are tricked into those same toxic conflicts that haunt them. And such people who were always so secretive, they're secretive because they're hiding things about themselves they don't want you to know. Either they did dirt to other people they don't want you to know about, or they are from an environment with toxic conflicts they don't want to face. And they don't want you to know about those toxic conflicts because then you may consider to keep them at a distance. So they're tricking you into their conflicts, and you're not even aware that those conflicts even exist. So later, when the conflicts that haunt them begin to also haunt you, now you think, what's going on? And likely when that happens, they ghost you. They ghost you completely. They block you on social media, or they stop talking to you, they're gone. Because now you'll ask questions, and then you realize, it's since I met this individual and began to hang out with this individual that all those weird things began to happen to me. And now that you begin to check on the individual you got involved, you realize, there's something wrong with him or her. And now you have questions, and they don't want to answer questions because then they need to admit, listen, I had issues afflicting me, but I kept those issues from you because I knew that if you would have known about those issues, you likely would have kept me at a distance. So I just use you to have easy daily life. I don't want to face anything. They will never admit this cowardice about themselves. So they will ghost you out of the blue. Just so that they don't have to face themselves nor being exposed. So, often when people ghost you, that is the main reason. They don't want to be exposed. Some people ghost you because they're done abusing you because you found another supplier to abuse. But a lot of times when people ghost you, it's because they withheld vital information about themselves from you, And now their crime of withholding vital information about themselves is backfiring, and they don't want to face the charges. Now, always examine community and family history. Not to dwell on the history, but to be informed and to know what to do about it in the present. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for listening. Keep on agreeing with Christ and be at peace.